In one night, a major American city collapsed. Not because of war, not because of invasion, because the system that held it together simply stopped working. And what happened next changed everything we think we know about how civilizations fall. September 1919. Boston, Massachusetts. 72% of the city's police officers picked up their badges and walked out. The reason was simple: years of ignored demands, poverty-level wages, and a government that treated them like furniture. They weren't asking for much, but nobody listened, so they left. And the residents of Boston shrugged. "We're a civilized city," people said. "We're educated. We're modern. We don't need someone watching over us." By midnight, gangs controlled the streets. Shops were destroyed. 9 people were dead. The American president called it a crime against civilization. But here is what actually matters about that story. Boston didn't collapse because an enemy attacked. No army crossed the border. No foreign threat appeared. The city fell apart because the people whose only job was to maintain order stopped showing up. Stability, it turned out, was never the natural state. It was a service. And the moment that service was removed, everything underneath it came apart in hours. Not days, hours. I'm telling you this story because the exact same mechanism is now operating at the scale of the entire global economy. And most people are watching the headlines without seeing the pattern. Before we get to today, we need to go back to 1929. Because almost everything you were taught about the Great Depression is incomplete. And that gap is the most important thing you need to understand right now. Yes, Wall Street crashed in October 1929. Yes, markets collapsed and millions lost money. But here is what no one tells you. After that crash, the world started recovering. The American economy was genuinely beginning to stabilize in the early 1930s. The body had been hit hard, but it was getting back up. If history had continued on that trajectory, we would be talking about the crash of 1929 the same way we talk about other serious recessions: painful, significant, but manageable. What turned it into the worst economic catastrophe in modern history did not come from Wall Street. It came from a single bank, in a single city, in a small country most people weren't watching. And when that system breaks, it doesn't fail slowly. It fails all at once. May 11th, 1931, a bank called Credit in Vienna, Austria, announced it was bankrupt. On the surface, this sounds like a local problem. A regional bank in a small country. Why would that matter to the world? Because Credit was not a local bank. It was the largest financial institution in Austria, founded by the Rothschild family, with investments in 11 other banks and 40 industrial companies, spanning Austria, Hungary, Romania, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. It was the central node of an entire regional financial network. And according to research from Cambridge University, it had actually been insolvent since 1925, 6 years before anyone admitted it. It had been dead while it was still walking. When the losses were finally revealed, they were catastrophic. Every time the Austrian government tried to calculate the true damage, they found more hidden beneath. Austria looked around for help. It reached out to neighboring countries. No one responded. What followed was a lesson in how fast panic travels when nothing is in its way. Within days, bank runs spread across Hungary, then Czechoslovakia, then Romania, then Poland. Within weeks, Germany, already fragile, suffered a full banking collapse. The German government froze the accounts and locked ordinary people out of their own money. 2 days later, Germany abandoned the gold standard. 2 months after that, Britain, the country whose pound sterling had anchored global trade for a century, also abandoned the gold standard. Then the wave reached America, triggering a second wave of collapse inside a country already on its knees. Follow that sequence carefully. One bank in Vienna in May. The entire global financial system in free fall by September. 4 months. That is how fast the dominoes fall when the first one tips and nobody catches it. The real question has never been what caused the collapse. The real question is why nobody stopped it. 3 major powers existed in 1931 that were theoretically capable of acting. Britain was exhausted, still bleeding from the First World War, financially drained, unable to stabilize even its own currency, as proven when it abandoned the gold standard that September. That left America and France. America in 1931 was already the most powerful economy on Earth. It had the money, the capacity, and every tool needed to step in and hold the system. But there was a tidal wave of isolationism running through American politics. This is not our problem. This is not our responsibility. And at the exact moment the global economy needed the American market to stay open so struggling countries could survive, the U.S. Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raising import taxes on over 20,000 products by roughly 20%. America didn't just refuse to help. It slammed the door and locked it. France had the gold reserves and the financial muscle to act, but turned economic rescue into political leverage, attaching humiliating conditions to any potential aid for Germany. The rescue never came. The world drowned not because there was no money and not because there was no solution. The world drowned because when the three most powerful countries sat in the same room staring at the same crisis, not one of them was willing to hold the direction. Millions lost their jobs, their savings, their homes, and in Germany, already humiliated, already starving, already at its breaking point, 2 years later, Adolf Hitler came to power. Was there anyone who understood why this happened? One man. His name was Charles Kindleberger, and his story is not just historically interesting, it is the reason why what is unfolding in 2026 should genuinely alarm you. Kindleberger was not a typical academic. He lived this history before he wrote about it. During the Second World War, he worked in American intelligence, personally responsible for identifying which targets in Germany American bombers should hit. This was the man drawing the map of destruction. After the war, he became the man drawing the map of reconstruction, one of the key architects of the Marshall Plan, the program that rebuilt Western Europe and prevented a second catastrophic collapse. Then he spent 33 years at MIT studying one question: why did the disaster happen, and what would it take to prevent it from happening again? He died in 2003 at 92 years old, and his answer is the most important framework for understanding the world right now. In 1973, he published a book called The World in Depression. His argument was simple and devastating. He said the global economy is like a residential neighborhood. A neighborhood functions because someone provides essential services: lighting, security, sanitation. Nobody thinks about these services when they exist because they are just there, in the background, invisible. But the moment they disappear, the neighborhood collapses. The global economy works the same way. There are 5 services that must exist for the international system to remain stable. First, a major power must keep its market open so the world can trade. Second, money must flow between countries through loans and investment in a stable and predictable way. Third, there must be a lender of last resort, someone who steps in when a major bank anywhere in the world is about to fall and stops that fall from triggering the next one. Fourth, there must be a global currency that the world trusts. And fifth, the major powers must coordinate with each other in moments of crisis rather than retreating into narrow self-interest. His central point was this: one powerful country must be willing to bear the cost of providing all 5 of these services, not out of generosity, not out of obligation, but because it understands that its own prosperity depends on the stability of the system it benefits from most. When Britain could no longer provide these services and America refused to, the result was mathematically inevitable. The Depression wasn't an accident, it was an absence. His book sat in academic libraries for decades, respected, cited, but not urgent. Then came January 2017. A few days before Donald Trump's first inauguration, a Harvard professor of international relations named Joseph Nye published a short article, 2 words as the title: The Kindleberger Trap. Nye wasn't worried about the scenario dominating foreign policy discussions at the time, that America and China would clash militarily as the old power confronted the rising one. He thought the more dangerous scenario was the opposite: America withdrawing from its global responsibilities before China was ready to take them on, not a collision between the old sheriff and the new one. A vacancy, a shift where neither of them shows up. He said the world doesn't need anyone to attack it in order to collapse. It only needs its stabilizer to leave the room at the wrong moment. Exactly like Boston in 1919. Nye published that warning in 2017. He spent the following years watching it unfold. He died in May 2025. The bomb he named is now detonating in real time. Most people are watching the headlines, but they are missing the pattern. What is happening in 2025 and 2026 is not a loose historical resemblance to 1930 and 1931. It is a near-exact structural replay, with the same mechanisms operating in the same sequence. In January 2025, the average tariff the United States imposed on imports was 2.3%. By January 2026, that number had reached 16%, a 7-fold increase in 12 months, and the highest American tariff level since 1936, precisely the period of the Great Depression. The stated justification was protecting the American worker. That was also the stated justification for Smoot-Hawley in 1930. The result, then as now, is an escalating global trade war. The first service has been withdrawn. The third service, the lender of last resort, is now genuinely in question for the first time since the modern financial system was built. In 2008 and again in 2020, the U.S. Federal Reserve opened emergency dollar lines to central banks around the world and pulled the global economy back from the edge both times. European central bankers are now quietly asking each other whether that would happen again, because the American president has stated publicly that he resents stabilizing Europe, and Reuters has reported that the United States may use emergency dollar access as a weapon against allies rather than a tool of systemic rescue. One Deutsche Bank analyst called this scenario the nuclear button of global finance. And the echo from 1931 is exact. Austria looked around for help and no one responded. On January 6, 2026, President Trump signed a memo withdrawing America from 66 international organizations simultaneously, the largest single withdrawal from multilateral institutions in modern American history, dismantling the very coordination infrastructure Kindleberger identified as one of the 5 pillars holding the system upright. Now someone will say, what about China? China is the second largest economy in the world. Surely it can fill the gap, but this is precisely the trap Nye warned about in 2017. China in 2026 is structurally where America was in 1931, a rising power with the size but not yet the architecture of global leadership. Today, 56.9% of global central bank reserves are held in US dollars. The Chinese yuan accounts for approximately 2%. The world trusts the dollar 30 times more as a reserve currency. Not because China lacks economic weight, but because China maintains strict capital controls and the world does not trust a currency it cannot move freely. Beyond that, China's per capita income remains roughly 1/6 of America's. And when China extends financial support internationally, it does so as a business, loans with conditions, contracts requiring something in return. That is not the behavior of a systemic stabilizer. A stabilizer absorbs costs to protect a system it benefits from. China is not yet willing to pay that bill. This is the exact gap Nye described. Not a new sheriff taking over, a vacancy, a night with no police. There is one difference between 1931 and 2026 that makes the current situation more alarming, not less. In 1931, America was declining a role it had never fully accepted. It was a rising power that hadn't completely stepped into global leadership yet. In 2026, America is the country that built this system. It designed the institutions, wrote the rules, created the dollar-based financial architecture, and spent 80 years as the explicit guarantor of global stability. When it withdraws now, it is not failing to step up. It is actively dismantling something it constructed. A neighborhood that never had a police force is dangerous. A neighborhood where someone methodically disables every security system, locks the police station, and sends the officers home is something else entirely. In August 2025, a group of leading European economists published a paper titled How to Avoid the Kindleberger Trap. Their proposal was specific. 14 central banks could form a coordinated reserve alliance, pooling approximately $1.9 trillion to create an emergency liquidity mechanism that does not require American authorization. It reminded me of something that happened in 1857, long before any of this modern machinery existed. The Hamburg banks were collapsing. No liquidity, no cash, people locked out of their own money. The Austrian National Bank in Vienna loaded a train with funds and sent it north. 4 days later, it arrived in Hamburg, and the crisis stopped. Not through a multilateral institution, not through a superpower, through one central bank that looked at its neighbor and decided it could not afford to watch it fall. In 1857, it took one bank and 4 days to stop the collapse of one city. In 2026, the scale is incomparably larger. It is not one city, it is the entire operating system of the global economy. And the question that no tariff schedule, no press conference, and no treaty can answer is the one Kindleberger spent his whole life asking, because history already gave us the answer. And every time a system loses its stabilizer, every single time, millions of ordinary people pay the price. The only question left is whether anyone will be on the other end of that train before the next station falls.